Okay, take two of this as I ended up recording, but it cut off. So anyway, we're going to be talking about the Kyle Dubas firing. So yeah, we're going to give you my thoughts on that. And then also I wanted to say, please subscribe to my channel if you're new to me. If not, no big deal. Also, my wife's at work today, so the dog is with me. So if there's anything going on in the background, it'll probably be him. But he's kind of tired, so I think he's taking a nap. Anyway, let's get on into the news about Kyle Dubas and kind of my thoughts on it. So Dubas gets fired yesterday. And originally I wanted to do a video yesterday, but I was kind of busy. So I said, you know what, I'll read some articles, I'll watch a few videos and kind of just gather my thoughts and then talk about it tomorrow. So here we are today talking about Dubas. So Dubas, of course, took over for Grandpa Lou for the Maple Leafs back in 2018. Ends up signing Tavares, which was a big signing at the time. Tavares, a guy that had been a franchise player for the New York Islanders, ended up ending their playoff drought that they had dating back at least 2 decades, I believe, when they beat the Panthers back in 2015 to move on to the second round. Would go on to end the drought for the Maple Leafs, so that was a good signing there, at least at the time it did. And then there was points where Tavares wasn't healthy, they weren't winning in the playoffs, but yeah. And then, of course, ends up signing big extensions to guys like Marner, Matthews, all that good stuff, blah, blah, blah. So you're able to keep this big four together, the core four, and things are looking good. And one thing I do want to say is for Kyle Dubas, during his tenure in Toronto, Toronto was one of the best teams in the league during the regular season. Outside of the shortened season back in the 2019-2020 season that ended up being finalized and finished in September, where they finished 13th, all those other years they were a top 10 team. In fact, every other year I believe they were at 7th or above in league overall standings. Past 2 years finishing 4th. That means it's not a fluke. I look at a lot of things, and I think that one thing's weird is North American sports, other sports in general, they view the postseason as the end-all be-all, and it is. At the end of the day, with the way we view sports, winning a championship is the goal. But it's funny because you will have teams that are really good regular season teams end up not finding a lot of success in the postseason, and then people just view them as just these terrible teams that they choke, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, what would you rather have as a GM or a coach? You would rather have a team that you know is probably going to be good and have your chance in the postseason versus a bad team that suddenly gets hot one year. Again, like Montreal. They got really, really hot when they ended up going into the Stanley Cup final. They were still a bad team then. They're not a great team now. While they are focused on the future, they clearly are not a team that's going to be headed to the Stanley Cup final next year, and they weren't going to be the year after. They just got hot. Carey Price ended up turning on the Carey Price charm. So, again, it's frustrating because you look at those seasons by Toronto and you realize that they did have some really good years. You don't end up being a top 4 team in the league back-to-back years by chance. That's not something that over 282-game seasons and then the playoffs you're just going to do as a fluke. Yet again, you're not going to do it twice. But that was kind of the story there. They end up going to the playoffs every single year that he's there, so that's good, but they hit a wall. I think the two most painful losses were the qualifying series loss to the Blue Jackets, because it looked like a series that they definitely should win. Kind of glad for them that they didn't win it then. If they would have got knocked out in the first round, then you would have the whole argument of, did they win a series, did they not? Because a lot of people view the qualifying series as different. And then the 3-1 series lead that they had against the Montreal Canadiens that they blew and then ended up being knocked out there. That one was pretty embarrassing, but I kind of circle back to this thing of, is it all on Sheldon Keefe? Is it his fault that they lost to the Blue Jackets? Is it his fault that they blew a 3-1 series lead to the Montreal Canadiens? Is it his fault that they got in a 3-0 hole against the Florida Panthers, a team that is obviously making it into the conference final, but a team that realistically shouldn't have been there? I don't think so. I don't think all this is to blame on Kyle, and I don't necessarily think that Toronto is saying that it is per se, but some of the fans really were toxic, which kind of brings me on to my next point. I feel like Kyle Dubas made a lot of these moves because he felt like he had to. He was a young GM, second youngest GM ever to come into the league, and he is like 32 at the time when he does. Comes into a team that is looking good, on the up and up, one of those teams that is seen as a team of the future, and has to make moves to keep them competitive. This is not a guy that's going to be focused necessarily on the future, especially as the playoff failure started to rack up. He's focused on the now, because with Toronto being the way it is, the fans really would start to say heads need to roll and guys need to be moved out. And so for him, especially in the past year or two, I think they had to be more aggressive, or at least in his eyes, they had to be more aggressive. That led to the Nick Foligno trade No, not this year, but the year before last, I believe. And that one didn't make a lot of sense to me, but he did make some other moves. Obviously traded for Shin. O'Reilly was just a huge trade. I love that, to be able to see O'Reilly play there. But moves that were made for the now. So for Dubas, he probably realized, especially this playoffs, that if they got knocked out in the first round, guess what? He probably doesn't have a job. So they end up getting out of the first round and then losing the second round. I think partially that he would have been safe had they made it to the conference final. But it just shows that a lot of these moves, maybe he doesn't necessarily make if he's not in such a pressure-filled environment. Now, I did watch the Hockey Guys video yesterday talking about Dubas and how he might go into another pressure cooker because he's already been in Toronto. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I also think he might be able to go to a market that doesn't have to necessarily win now. He could start with a clean slate and be able to do with the picks what he wants, and maybe doesn't have to sacrifice picks to get some talent that is able to win them games right away, which would be an interesting thing for them. But it kind of ties into how he ends up losing his job. So earlier in the week, he does a press conference, talks about the toll for his family, stuff like that, and it's kind of talked about, and there's some buzz about whether or not he would be the GM going forward, would he want to be, blah, blah, blah. Well, I guess under the curtains, behind the curtains, you had Shanahan, of course, for MLSC, for the Maple Leafs, basically say, we're going to give you, Kyle, a $4 million a year for a new contract, blah, 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 and we want you to, stick around. At least that's what's being reported right now. I guess we'll find out some stuff later. And it seems like things time to go by, a few days go by, and then Dubas comes back and says, you know what? Actually, I think I want $6 million a year, and then Shanahan fires him. I'm not going to lie to you right now. That is a loss for Toronto. While I don't exactly know GM salaries, I could look it up and I'll probably get some information. I don't know if they have every GM in their salary listed. $6 million obviously seemed to be a breaking point there for them, but I still think this is a loss for multiple reasons. Dubas, like I said, was a guy that is young, seen as super smart, and won a Calder Cup with the Toronto Marlies, so that's good, and then was able to keep this team competitive for half a decade and one of the best teams in the regular season. You lose him, so right away you're thinking, well, we just lost one of the smartest, youngest GMs in the league compared to like Grandpa Lou, who is 80. What are we going to do there? Well, the great news is that they did it in the middle of May, and you have free agency that starts in July. You have the draft coming up. So many things going on where you have to figure out things for your roster, what's going to happen in the future, how do they view this team going forward. I just don't exactly get the idea here for Toronto to lose a guy like Dubas and just seem to do it so late in the year. I know that they were just in the playoffs, so that's partially tied to it. But in general, I mean, the $2 million, I feel like would have been the end-all be-all. And for the Leafs, this is an L in my opinion. But we will see. I think for Dubas, one thing that excites me is while he said that he wants to be in Toronto, nowhere else, I don't exactly think that's true. If you're young or old, whatever the case is, if somebody's going to give you multiple millions of dollars to do something you're already doing, you probably are going to be doing that anyway. So he's probably going to end up in another market, which I think is going to be good for another team. And I will be interested to see, could he be one of those guys that sticks with a team for 10 plus years and really be the decision maker for the team and show what he can do? Because again, I think some of the stuff is he had to trade away some of those picks and some of that talent to be able to get more proven talent. I don't exactly know what his ability would be to maintain a team's competitive level, but I'm excited for him, and I do think that the future could be bright for him, and I want to see what happens. And I really, really think some teams should be interested in trying to talk to him, even if they don't hire him, just to see what's going to go on. But we will see. So what do you guys think exactly with all this? Do you think that the Maple Leafs end up losing here? Do you think it's kind of a gray area where they said the money was an issue and they weren't sure about his investment into the franchise? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this down below in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe. Have a great night, and you go love hockey, all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.